Morning, Chip.
Morning.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today and
No
share some
problem.
of the journey on the company that you work for and the problem that you're trying to solve.
Absolutely.
Can you tell a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, we're a global experiences marketplace for travelers who want to explore Black identity and the African diaspora all over the world.
That's awesome, right?
Yeah.
How do you get started on this journey?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So our CEO, Sheree Robinson, started Tastemakers Africa 4 years ago. And that came from her personal experience as a Black woman in the US who wanted to travel the world, but through her lens and wasn't finding any resources to do it, both on the content side in terms of just the lived experience of what it meant to be a Black traveler in countries all over the world. So she started Tastemakers Africa with that mission. A lot of twists and turns along the way. I joined the team about a year ago to help us really bring our technology forward and pivot a little bit to launch what we now have, which is our peer-to-peer experiences marketplace. My journey to getting there included a lot of time working in the New York tech ecosystem.
Awesome.
First as a freelancer and then for a few years running my own digital agency where I got to work with hundreds of tech entrepreneurs, startups, and really learning how to build a product at scale for multiple teams at once. And now my journey with Tastemakers has been a mission that I really love to support, as well as the ability to focus in on one product and really put all my weight behind it and scale it as best I can.
And that's awesome to hear. Is that where you met Sheree?
Yes, so Tastemakers was a client of mine.
Awesome.
And then I just love what they were doing, and so I decided to join their team full time.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right? Once you work with something, you see something unique and special, and you feel like the urge to, you want to be part of it, right? So that's great.
Yeah.
And the problem that you're trying to solve, it sort of resonates with me in a way, right? So, I'm from India, born, brought up there, right? And I've spent about 20 plus years in the US, and my friends are always curious, right? What is India like, right? And they'll come and ask me questions, and the next question that comes up is, it safe to travel? Right?
Absolutely.
And all these notions are set by media stereotypes, right? And
Stereotypes across the board.
Exactly, right? And I took a couple of my friends with me to the country, and then when they experienced the place, their whole perception about the place, the people, changes dramatically, right?
Right.
It takes them from being curious to having the experience, right? The gap that you have, it just becomes shorter and shorter, right? So I think that probably sounds like a mission that you guys are onto as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're addressing one of the core tenets of what we work on, which is that when you're traveling to a new place, you want to talk to someone who understands the culture of that place and someone who's from there.
Right.
So for us, we have an extraordinarily diverse team, everything from, people who've worked within the continent, people who live within the continent, people who live in the US, who have all of these different perspectives, but the focus is really how do you connect a traveler who's interested in Black culture or themselves a member of the diaspora to African culture through the lens of African culture. So that's the peer-to-peer part, which we think is really powerful.
Right.
And that's why the cultural conversation can happen at such a higher level, because it's like you're asking your friend who's from that place.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to create thousands and thousands of times all over the continent and across the world.
That is awesome, right? So what makes you unique in a way where it doesn't end up being like, Me Too experience, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? What makes these stories, the travelers that use a product or service and the experience that they get out of, right? What are the stories that taking back home with them and telling their friends and family? It has to be unique in a way versus Me Too, I've done this before too, right?
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So I think something that makes us really unique is the community aspect of what we do. So much of being a Tastemakers traveler is being a part of the Tastemakers community. So we have travelers who've traveled with us and then joined on our curators, who we call our tour operators. And they've loved what they saw and they want to be part of it, so started working within our system as well. And what travelers take away is because they share this appreciation for, I want to do this trip through a cultural lens.
Right,
and it doesn't mean you're not doing bucket list items or
Right.
exploring the place you're in, but oftentimes the experiences you're embarking on are through what does this culture mean to me, what is the significance to me, and how do I talk more about that. So they're sharing that experience with other travelers who are thinking the same thing, and they, more often than not, are having such meaningful conversations about it. So just last week we had a group of 3 travelers and then a single traveler who happened to be in the same experience. And then they booked a new experience together and became a group for the next 3 days.
That's awesome.
Day after day. And from a product e-commerce perspective, that's great and everything, but we think it speaks to community and how those travelers were able to identify each other and
Right,
have a
right.
great conversation, and then decided to keep traveling together for the rest of their journey.
That's awesome to hear. Let's talk. You touched briefly on the business side of the things, right? And that always makes me curious about learning. What the size of the opportunity in front of us, right? And
Yeah.
I'm a big traveler myself, right? And I use third-party websites and get my research from TripAdvisor. Sometimes book some tours from Viator and whatnot. And on an average, I end up spending $600-700 in experience, right? To me, that is significant per traveler, right? So
Absolutely.
Can you speak about the space and a business all up? What's the opportunity in front of you guys?
Yeah, the approach, it gets to what you're speaking to, which is, we have a web application where we're an e-commerce type operation. So it's how are we having people book their entire trip with us. Something that's really interesting in the travel space is that every consumer's go-to for airlines is, I'll whip out my phone, I have my preferred site. Every consumer's go-to for hotels is I pick my site. But when it comes to experiences, you just mentioned two that you're exploring, and I talk to so many consumers through user testing as well as just conversations with our own travelers. And people don't necessarily have their habits down yet.
Right.
The whole concept of experiences online is new in the last few years.
Right.
And we're very lucky that we were one of the first marketplaces, and we're very lucky now to be starting to really grow it. And so what we get to do at this really special time in terms of business model is grow the marketplace, which is an online website, and then teach people what it means to have this as a source and how to use it.
Right.
And so I think with that, it's teaching them the habits of you can have your whole trip here, and we can start to offer them more to make their experience as great as possible.
That's awesome to hear, right? And again, it's not one of those things that comes out as a just bucket list, right? It's hard to curate the content,
right?
Even from the experiences that you want to choose and whatnot, and it's pretty difficult to find something that is unique.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I think that's a fantastic problem to solve, right?
It is.
You briefly talked about the website that you have to maintain and whatnot, and being a CTO, and I'm super curious to learn, about the technology that you use, how those things are working. Can you speak a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely. So we currently run a full stack web application. It's based on microservice architecture, really focusing on trying to keep things as small and manageable as possible, working with our team up until now. And the way the website works, it's a two-sided marketplace. So we have a set of tools for the consumer, which looks more or less like an e-commerce website where you're purchasing experiences, and everything like that. And then on the supplier side, so our suppliers, we call them our curators. It's these, the people who you're connecting to. So travelers are purchasing experiences from these curators directly.
I see.
And we're processing the transaction, but they're buying it from them.
Right.
And on their side, they have a set of tools as well to manage their own bookings. And the way the ecosystem works now, we're coming up on 300 curators on our side, which is across Africa, and we're starting in Europe, in the America as well. And then on the traveler side, where we have thousands of travelers, the goal is to start to teach them to use the ecosystem on their own to their advantage, and we're building out the tools for them to do that. To manage their own prices, to stay competitive, to manage their own availability, to make sure that they're around on the right dates, things like that. And we're starting to see more engagement, which is really exciting because people are approaching this as entrepreneurs.
Right.
To say, I see my place in this ecosystem, and I know not only can I make money, but I can find the best ways to have travelers come into my life and show them a part of my community and my world more often. Yeah,
that's awesome, right? So you talked about reducing the friction on using the tooling, not just on the user experience side of the front end on the consumer side, but as well as the curators, right?
Absolutely.
And can you talk about that platform? So they maintain their own set of technology and tools, or how do they participate within your backend?
Absolutely. So their interface looks similar to the users. The goal is to make it as simple as possible. For one thing, not only are we training our users what it's like to buy experiences online, we're training our suppliers. Something that Tastemakers is really proud of is we call our tour operators, our tour guides, curators, not only because it speaks more to what they're actually doing, but most of them aren't traditional tour operators. We're not finding third-party tour operators. We have local staff in every country we operate in, and they're finding chefs, celebrities, DJs, artists, people who have their own lives. And we're asking, do you want to bring people into your life and really show this traveler, what you're doing, not just unorganically saying, I'm doing this just for the tour.
Right.
So because of that, there was this huge onus to have the best possible user experience and to really build tools that are easy for curators to use, because this is a side hustle for them, and this is something they consider important but don't necessarily have the time to manage. And that's an active process.
Okay.
Just like I'm doing constant user testing with our travelers, and we just talked about this before, but I mean, doing user testing in market and even heading to Ghana next week to talk to our curators.
Awesome.
And get a feel for what tools they need next.
Right. And are you finding some patterns across the board, or there's unique needs depending on the different countries and experiences?
Something unique that I think has happened, but because we're doing business currently mostly in Africa, and that's where Tastemakers Africa started, hence the name, is our communication preferences. So we're working in multilingual environments. We're working with multiple platforms.
Right.
So something we're building now that we're really excited about is our ability to completely make notifications agnostic. Meaning if a traveler has a preference for messaging their curator once they've purchased their experience and will have questions, if they have a preference of asking questions through a web dashboard, we want to enable them to do that. But if this curator, and we have a curator named Auntie Grace, she's in Ghana, she does a batik fabric workshop, but she's an older lady and she's not using her laptop and checking her email or looking at her web notifications. She receives the same message on her WhatsApp. And then she can respond in WhatsApp and the traveler gets it back on their email, whatever they prefer.
Exactly.
Because one, they're travelers. So their mode of communication changes when they're on the airplane or when they're traveling or before. Like those are all three different modes. And for our curators, we need to meet them where they are.
Exactly.
Some prefer text, some prefer WhatsApp, some prefer emails, but we want to give them the flexibility to pick. And then that for us allows us to be in their lives in the way they want it, not in any way that annoys them or causes friction.
Exactly. That's one of the things that you talked about, is how do you reduce the friction, and that's so powerful, right? Because at times when you're building technology, these are small things that minute things that we just tend to overlook, right? And especially in the areas where things are still developing, right? And then there's experiences that are coming from people that are local, might not have access to the languages, the technology that we take it for granted, right? And that's super powerful, right? So I'm glad to hear that. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about how's your journey being working with Hatch and DO in general?
Yeah, so in my past life, running a digital agency, we were 100% DigitalOcean.
Okay.
And the reason for that was working within a system where I had full stack engineers, and we sort of included servers in that full stack, which really made sense for agile teams and how we were practicing them. And so when I came over to Tastemakers, we were on AWS, because we had some credits from them, had built infrastructure on it. Previous developers had made that decision. So that's where I started. But if I didn't know it before, I know it now. The lack of user interface in AWS is such a barrier to a development team. And it's any development team. I'm CTO, and for the last few months, I've been the solo developer. We're currently hiring out our core engineering team in New York. And in either case, we know that because things on AWS are so complicated, we are going to have problems that we have to then solve just due to the issues with understanding how to deploy. And we're switching to DigitalOcean and we're entering Hatch. I'm really excited.
That's awesome.
Because now I know I don't have to hire a full stack engineer that's done 3 years of server work. Right? I can hire one who's maybe never touched it, and I have such confidence that because of DigitalOcean's community, postings, and just the ease of use, I can teach them how to deploy a droplet in a day. I can teach them what our ecosystem looks like in a day, and I can visualize it for them much more easily using DigitalOcean and DigitalOcean's tools than I ever could with AWS, which would take me months to try and teach someone. And so it really supports us being an agile team.
Right. It makes me super happy hearing that. Thank you. And that's what we strive for, to make things simple and easy for the users to go. Were there any challenges that you faced migrating over or changing the stack, like any opportunity that you can share with the users on or on the technical side of things, right? And gotchas that you had on building the stack.
One thing that is going well, and we're still in this process, mind you, but knowing that DigitalOcean mimics some general practices like S3, and then moving that over into Spaces, that has been really easy. Something that's been a lot harder is that I love the Tastemakers community, but even though we're a startup, we have a pretty active user base, meaning downtime is very not tolerable among our community. And so with a small team, especially not a dedicated DevOps team, it takes a lot of creativity and pre-planning of saying, what does this migration look like? What steps have to happen when? And running through it 10 times over, just to make sure that you're making the best decisions in terms of downtime and in keeping user experience consistent.
Right, and and that's super critical, right? When changing this, not only when changing the stack, right? Just running the business all up, right? Because any downtime is essentially a bad user experience, and bad user experience is a bad revenue and whatnot, right? So
of course,
you briefly talked about the teams. Like, can you tell me how big is the team all up today, working on the tech and the company?
So currently, tech is one.
Okay,
you're talking to him.
Perfect. Yes.
CTO is an interesting term. Hopefully, the term scales with the company, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Total, our team is currently 4 people.
4 people, okay.
And that includes Shrey, our founder and CEO, as well as roles in business development and our community managers who are actually in Africa working with our travelers and curators every day. Awesome.
And by the way, I did some research and it seems like you guys have raised a good round, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yes, we closed our seed round 2 weeks ago.
That's
We're very excited about it.
That's good to hear, right? Now that some of the plans I'm hoping is essentially to expand the team, right?
Absolutely, with a focus on technology.
Exactly, right? So can you talk about what the success is gonna look like for you guys in 6 months, a year or 2 from now?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of hiring specifically, we're looking at bringing on 2 engineers and a lead designer.
Awesome.
And we've picked New York as headquarters for a lot of different reasons, but the startup community in New York is one of the big ones.
Yes.
And getting that support from the travel startup community specifically has been great, but more generally, to have software engineers so engaged with the startup community and to have so much support, not just from investors, but in terms of the events we can go to and how we can engage back and really share in the knowledge that is a very diverse New York startup community with people working on everything under the sun. That's been really helpful. So we're excited to scale the team there and have our core team in New York. What they'll build and what that looks like 6 months, 12 months from now is we're looking to grow a lot. We've unlocked something on the user side and our curator side, and we have demand from both sides. We have demand from countries across Africa and across the world to say, we have a population that wants to engage. And you have communities across the US that have conversations around Black identity and they want to engage with users who want to talk with them about that. So everything from a Black-owned Brooklyn bar crawl to different experiences in Atlanta, in DC, as well as all across Europe, talking about different immigrant populations from Africa and what it means to not visit the Eiffel Tower, but explore it from an African cultural lens.
Oh, awesome.
So in thinking of all that, we want to meet that demand.
And
we see it on both sides, and we're really excited to. And so it's scaling up to be able to handle that. It means more tools. It means a mobile application to offer way more connectivity among our travelers and our curators, because they're in that community, they're already talking to each other. Why can't we make it easier for them? And then a lot of starting to understand what our development operations looks like. So the more tools we provide for our curators, the more infrastructure we'll be having on the continent of Africa and all over the world of where we are, and dealing with every problem that a traveler has when they're traveling with us. So the correct infrastructure for low data environments, no data environments, and thinking through those challenges at scale.
That's awesome. That's amazing to hear, right? So you briefly touched on environments where there's tons and tons of data and no data, right? Can you explain those scenarios? Like, what exactly do you mean when you say there's no data, and what experiences you're trying to build around that?
Absolutely. It might say cliche. It might sound cliche to think, as CTO, let's just capture all the data possible. But I think for us, what we want to do is own a traveler's experience while they're traveling. Because there's so many opportunities for connection. There's so many opportunities to have unique experiences. There's so many opportunities to learn more about the place than you otherwise would have. And so for us, that's a journey of data on the back end. It's a journey of how do we get as much information as possible So we know the touch points for that traveler. We know when they've landed, so we can get more information to them, whether that's welcome, or here's where maybe you want to go get a drink now that you're in the country, or connecting with them after an experience to say, here's the other travelers you were just with. Why don't you two think about traveling together tomorrow? Or here's something we think you'll like. But those recommendations, owning the user's trip, is really a question of as much real-time data as possible. And as you mentioned, because we built this business starting in Africa, so much of that gathering of data is, well, what if the traveler doesn't have cell data? What if they don't have a cell phone plan? So how are we capturing it otherwise? We've been talking with some partners that are doing some really cool things in no data environments, sort of working with pay for play in terms of using SIM cards and doing some interesting things that we've seen where we can capture it. And I talked about a mobile application, and for us, that's a huge way to get a ton of touch points and gather as much as possible, so we can really provide for a user's trip, we understand a user's trip. So it's creative problem solving is still to be done. But really exploring what that means with the assumption that we're not going to have a perfect environment has challenged us to come up with creative solutions already. So I'm excited to see what we do from here.
That's such a unique opportunity, right? Those are some, again, going back to the notion of missing on the smaller points, taking those things for granted. Like I've been in many situations in remote countries where I took things like I have international data, that's perfect, but things will work, and you realize after landing, well, it's not really connected, and you find yourself so lost, a little scared, and trying to solve those problems is so unique, and just beyond solving the experiences that you're going after, so I'm pretty sure some really cool things will come out from these journey, and industry as a whole will benefit from some of the innovations that you guys are trying to.
I think so. And as you mentioned, we are unique. Not just building a business in Africa, but we approach things with a cultural lens, and we approach things with a community who are all trying to travel and explore what it means to be a part of the African diaspora. And those two unique facets means our community is very engaged with us, gives us amazing feedback, good and bad, all the time, as well as presents unique challenges. So we get to solve those challenges before anyone's ever thought of them. And we get to solve challenges for being in Africa. We get to solve challenges for working within our community before anyone else thinks about it. And so you're completely right, is we hope that as a company on the business side, and especially on the technology side, that as we scale, we'll be solving things that become opportunities for the travel industry as a whole. That's so good to hear, And it sounds like you have your hands wrapped around the technology piece and how to scale perfectly well, The question that came to my mind was, yes, you're building a unique brand, The next problem that you might end up facing is, how do you drive the brand awareness, in such a really big market? How do people come to know about your site, and how do they land to the right place? Can you talk about some of the opportunities that people can learn from you, and what's the strategy around being that really big brand? Absolutely. So we're very lucky that we're definitely punching above our weight class right now in terms of brand identity. It's one of the reasons I joined the team in the first place. Awesome. And it's a credit to the team that I wasn't a part of at the time that created an amazing brand awareness before the company. And I think that's been so important and such a great driver, because you have that community support and you have people cheering you on before they really know what you sell. Which is what a good brand can do. And so for us using that brand, we really identify with social channels, which means a host of different things, everything from Instagram content to Instagram stories, and getting content to people who want to be excited about their next trip, wherever they're traveling. And so we've been able to do that now, and we were able to do it before we were even selling experiences. But now it's a way for us to educate them and then drive them to say, well, now that you're traveling, we might be an opportunity for you to take an experience with us, take a tour with us, and become part of the Tastemakers community. And as we expand, we look at more channels that are about storytelling. So Instagram has been the perfect driver because it understands storytelling. Email marketing for us has been huge because we're able to do medium form, saying this is my story. And if you've ever subscribed to our emails, it's our founder just talking.
Awesome.
It's so informal. It's so just saying, here's what happened at work today. It's so, I lived in, Ghana, for this amount of time, and here's why. It's just storytelling.
Exactly.
And it's short. It's a little bit raw, but that drives traction for us.
Right.
And then, thinking about content in ways short, medium, and long. We host all of our own content as well. So we have tons of travelers who will never buy from us, but live on our blog.
Oh.
And that for us is excellent because we're creating its own ecosystem there.
It's a community in a way, right?
It's absolutely a community, and we want to really lean into that and provide tools within that because we know it will drive traffic. We know it will drive conversions, but it's excellent to have the travel community recognize us, even if they don't travel with us, but to still be in our community and benefit from it in some way.
Exactly. It will play a huge role, especially in a storytelling way, right?
Right.
If that's the core piece that you're going after.
Absolutely.
And I think, that was one of the biggest takeaway from me, from what you just said in the last couple of minutes around knowing what you want your brand to be, what you want your brand to be, right? And then you picked on the right thing, being a travel company, storytelling is a great way to go, right? And then deciding right platforms on a social media side of things to engage on, like so Instagram stories that you said.
Absolutely.
It just made perfect sense. Like, I would not have thought about it until you told me, and I was like, yeah, storytelling, Instagram, that makes perfect sense,
Absolutely.
And it's a great way to go viral, right? So some really, really good tips for the users, right? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
There is so much inspiration on what you guys are trying to do, right? And that begs the question, like, what inspires you?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
One thing, not to overdo it, but I'm very inspired by Tastemakers. I love the company I work for. I'm in a unique position. I'm not the co-founding CTO. I came on later, but I was so inspired by this opportunity where, how great is it to say, here's a community that hasn't been served the product that they're asking for.
That's awesome.
Can you be the person who builds a diverse team that's going to create that product and then make it 10 times better?
Yeah.
And the engineer, project manager, and CTO inside of me said yes. Like that's such an amazing opportunity. And so to be inspired by work is really great.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I think really inspires me on the tech side is I've had the great pleasure of working with a lot of designers in my career. I am not a designer at all. So, and I'm willing to admit that. I'm pretty terrible just trying to pull together designs.
Just like me.
I've worked with designers that have user experience and UX training properly, and that's taught me so much about agile development.
Right.
And it's something I've been practicing as a software engineer my whole life. But what really inspires me, in research I do all the time, is looking at IDEO design sprints and keeping in touch with designers in New York that I have good relationships with, and really learning what's new. Not because I'm going to be a better designer, I think that's a lost cause, but because I really want to learn from the process of design sprints and the process of design as a whole, and then apply that to my piece of this organization.
Right.
What does that look like for designing an engineering team, which is my challenge right now?
Exactly.
What does that look like from project architecture?
Right.
Because I think people don't realize programming is really a creative thing.
Right.
And so some of my most creative friends inspire me to be more creative on the technical side of things.
Right. Yeah. You summarized it pretty well. Like a couple of things, in a takeaway. Like, it is so much amazing to work for an individual that inspires you the most, right? In a way, like, you're working for a company and a founder who actually is a source of inspiration, right?
Absolutely.
Very few people can say that, right? So that's amazing, right? The second thing, like the designers, right? They make the user experience, and that is the key to your business success, right? And same goes for DO. Like, I absolutely love our design team, right? What makes us unique is keeping things simple, right? And thinking through users' lens, right? So these are two great things to be inspired with, and a great takeaways for people watching this talk. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.